here. I worked for George Bush personally at the end of the Angolan operation when he was CIA director in 1976. We had broken the law and we had perjured ourselves to cover it up. We being Henry Kissinger and Bill Colby, mostly me being in a staff position under them. Bush's policies were not to find out the truth and punish the perpetrators and clean up the CIA. It was to cover for us. He went to the congressional committees and said, I wasn't here, but these nice people I'm meeting, he's a very nice person, by the way. He would walk down the hall shaking our hands saying, hello, I'm George Bush, and I want you to know I love being here working with all these fine people in the CIA. And we were saying, huh? I mean, this is the CIA director, is supposed to have kind of an aura, you know. But he was going to the Congress saying, I can't believe that these nice people out there would do the things that you're alleging, but I'll check. And then he had a young attorney sent down to my office to go through my files to purge them of documents that would prove exactly what they were accusing us of. And then he went back to them and said, we've checked, there are no files in the agency that prove anything like you're alleging, therefore you can drop it, and they did. In the Orlando Letelier killing, this is a bombing in Washington Square in our capital done by CIA or former CIA agents with DINA agents from the Chilean service. He immediately went to the Justice Department and asked them to soft pedal it because he said it involved sensitive relationships with other countries, meaning the service in Chile, a bombing in this capital, and he wants to cover it up. He also went to the veterans of the O.P. Mongoose destabilization of Cuba. When Johnson had shut that program down, or Kennedy had shut it down and Johnson had let it die, these people had turned to drug smuggling and murder and bombing, shooting bazookas at ships coming into the Miami harbor, stuff like that, out of control. He went to them and said, look, the pressure is mounting, you've got to get your act out of the country. And in June of '76, they went to the Dominican Republic and had a meeting and formed this CORU group, planning their activities, counter-revolutionary unit. And in October 6 of 1976, they blew up an airplane that was taking off from Barbados, killing 73 passengers on board in a raw act of terrorism. Luis Posada Carillas and Orlando Bosch were jailed in Venezuela for being the authors of that bombing. We have classified testimony before the Senate Church Committee and before the House Assassination Committee that Orlando Bosch was also a member of the team that killed President Kennedy. And in the Iran-Contra scandal, we have a very curious and awesome and awful situation where the vice president was supposedly in charge of an anti-drug task force, where he got involved in the Contra program, where he had this man, Don Gregg, a longtime CIA officer working as his national security advisor. And Gregg had a relationship with Felix Rodriguez, who was one of the Bay of Pigs veterans, one of the drug smuggling, destabilizing people working against Cuba, who was with Don Gregg in MR3 in Vietnam, my military region in Vietnam, although we did not overlap there. They were there before I got there. Bush has Don Gregg working for him, and they placed Felix Rodriguez in Ilopango in El Salvador, where he's in charge of, and we have the documents proving that he was involved in primarily working with the Contra Air Force, and these were the planes that were flying the drugs, the arms to the Contras and the drugs back to the United States. We have testimony before our courts and evidence in the trial of Millan Rodriguez that they delivered, they being Millan, laundering money for the Medellin, delivered $10 million to the Contras through Felix Rodriguez, buying access to this air wing. Now, these people got Luis Posada Carillas out of prison in Venezuela. Felix Rodriguez told the press, he said, we needed him. He's a good man. And they got Luis Posada Carillas out of Venezuela to help them with this program. And this man was the terrorist who was involved in blowing up the passenger plane that was taking off from Barbados. And he's working for Felix Rodriguez, who is reporting directly to the Vice President's office, Vice President George Bush's office, and flying up to report in person and going into Bush's office to report. Bush says he doesn't remember they're ever talking about the Contra program or anything down in Central America. They were talking about their lunch or dinner or something. See, the trouble with this is that with Ronald Reagan, you really could believe that he didn't understand when people briefed him. The man's mind skipped in and out, as everyone well knew. But George Bush is an intelligence person. It's very difficult to believe that he would not be mentally involved in these things. But even if by chance they did talk about lunch or breakfast, when it became clear, we brought it out in the media vigorously, and the Congress discussed it, that a known terrorist was working one step up the chain or down the chain of command from him, reporting into his office, he did not purge himself of these associations. To the contrary, he went on and nominated Don Gregg to be ambassador to Korea, where I believe he is today. One might speculate, going back to Noriega's boast, that George Bush could not separate himself from these people because of what they would know of their involvement with him going back to the CIA days and to the activities when he was vice president working with them. Looking at George Bush's policies now, he's been in office a few months and we can begin to measure the personality of his presidency. He's maintaining a slightly lower, less noisy profile than Ronald Reagan, but he's continuing his policies across the globe. Bush has refused the Soviets' offer for both superpowers to abstain from delivering arms to the combatants in Afghanistan. He has asked for military aid for the Contras in Nicaragua so they could continue fighting. He is pressing ahead with vigorous plans to interfere with the elections in Nicaragua. That's exactly what's happening now when these Contras are going back across the border in uniform with their weapons to disrupt the elections in Nicaragua today. He has already interfered with the elections in Panama. As you recall, the Congress allocated $10 million for the purpose of disrupting those elections. He encouraged a disastrous coup d'etat in Panama that blew up, I must say, in his own face. He's delivering arms through Thailand into Kampuchea, destabilizing that country that hasn't had a moment's peace for 25 years. And he's continuing to deliver arms to Jonas Savimbi in Angola, including Stinger missiles, ground-to-air missiles, after Savimbi has boasted openly of shooting down passenger planes. And he's continued military support for the death squads in El Salvador. And under the guise of the drug war, he's putting U.S. military into Latin America, where they're doing the same thing in countries like they've been doing in El Salvador, flying planes, strafing, and rocketing villages. Meanwhile, despite glasnost, the Soviet record is not all that much better. They're continuing to pump arms into Afghanistan and Kampuchea. They're increasing expenditures on their military. In fact, glasnost was not intended to benefit the Third World. The impetus behind glasnost was Soviet economic problems, not sympathy for the Third World. If you go back and read Andrei Kozyrov's article in the New York Times on January 7 of 1989, you find he's calling for the Soviet Union to join with the United States in the capitalist solution and supporting the status quo and what they call stability in countries of the world in the interest of world trade, in which the Soviet Union would become more active. And we find the most shocking thing of all to date is that today Soviet attack helicopters designed for the fighting in Afghanistan are now being used in joint operations with U.S. military and Peruvian military in Peru to strafe and rocket villagers there. Meanwhile, you've got to be screaming, why? What is the purpose of all this? And I promised you I'd bring it all together and show you how these things interrelate. And in a very few minutes, I propose to do that so we can get on to the question and answer period, which is really the most fun part, where you can direct, your interests in these things. Why would we spend billions of dollars to destabilize every corner of the globe for 4 or 5 decades? Economics. I mean, it's a complex world. There are lots of reasons. There are people who do these things just because they think they're fun, to blow things up and kill people. But economics, the biggest stuff. $150 billion drug trade speaks for itself. The second most profitable industry in the world, of course, is the production of arms. $3 billion a day bought and sold of weapons. The defense corporations making 20 to 24% profit. We just got through spending a total of $2.2 trillion on the largest arms buildup perhaps in the history of the world, certainly of any peacetime arms buildup. And our debt increasing by just about exactly the same amount during that period of time. The result is that we've created a society that's dominated by what President Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. The U.S. taxpayer is now carrying a gigantic burden. 1/3 of our budget is for the military. 53 cents, according to the Washington Post, of every tax dollar goes to the military. We begin the conditioning to war in this country, this permanent war complex we maintain, pretending we're good guys, at the age of 2. This is the age at which we put our children in front of the one-eyed babysitter and turn it on so we can go wash the dishes or take a break. And they watch the same show with different characters 10 or 15 times a day. And I'm talking about, I have a kid, so I'm into these things. You know, He-Man and Sheena and Scooby-Doo even, and the Transformers and the Decepticons, and what each one of these nice little people put upon by ugly evil forces, always saying, please be nice. The evil forces insist on attacking, and at the last minute the good guys rise up and stomp them down. Cut, commercial, and we move on, you know, to the next show. Until it's estimated when we graduate from high school, we spent more time watching violence on television than we've spent in the classrooms itself. And then you get into the movies we've been feeding ourselves during this military buildup during the 80s. Rambo, Commando, Red Dawn, the Rocky series, Under Siege, Delta Force, America, Missing in Action, Top Gun, Heartbreak Ridge, Death Before Dishonor, Platoon, Hamburger Hill, Tour of Duty, China Beach, and they go on and on. How many people saw the movie Red Dawn, by the way? This is fun. Don't be embarrassed. It's a great movie. Now, this story, it's science fiction. The producer of this movie went on television around the nation saying it was his purpose to create a movie that would make people, that would draw people back to war, that would make them feel war could be a good and exciting thing. And this film was actually shown in Marine boot camps to motivate people, and to National Guard groups that were about to go down to train in Honduras for the possible invasion of Nicaragua. The science fiction is that they have a force, as you recall, of Russians, Cubans, and Nicaraguans who've invaded the United States, and they've gotten all the way to the Rocky Mountains. Now, you ask yourself why, the planning as they did the movie, why did they pick Russians, Cubans, and Nicaraguans? I mean, it would be a better movie if they picked Russians, Canadians, and Cubans. See, because Canada is an industrial country and there's a huge border, and there could be the Russians coming across at 100 places and pinning us against Cuba. I mean, you could kind of get your head in. I mean, it's all science fiction. You know, blow off our nuclear weapons and our army and all of that. This is the given. So why did they pick Nicaragua instead of, say, Canada? And the answer is, of course, they were targeting Nicaragua for a possible invasion by U.S. troops. So they had to condition the people that Nicaragua would be the next enemy, the next target. Anyway, this force gets all the way to the Rocky Mountains, where they're eventually stopped by the high school football team. Now, I submit to you that the 80s, you see, is the decade of the middle-aged women. This is, you know, Dallas and Dynasty and the Golden Girls and Murder, She Wrote. Linda Evans, you know, is in better physical condition than I am, and Joan Collins is older than I am, and she's a sex symbol, and the Nautilus workouts and the jogging. I mean, an 80s movie would have been the Soviets, Cubans, and Nicaraguans with middle-aged school teachers running through the mountains and shooting them down and drinking deer's blood and all of that. So why did they pick the high school football team? You see, the answer is obvious. They're going to fight the next war with the 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds. It's not going to be the middle-aged 50-year-olds. We're too smart. We've seen the cynicism of war. We wouldn't buy it. It's at that age, the high school graduates, where the young men are suffering from their massive doses of testosterone poisoning. And their minds have not yet had a chance to be filled, for all of them. Some are precautious, but many of them have not yet had a chance to fill their minds with experience, to understand what the world is all about, to understand how they're being used. So that's why they targeted that film at the high school. And then you look at the ads on television that were pumping at us then and now. Join the Army, be all that you can be, with these tanks jumping ditches and helicopters going 200 miles an hour. And these things are great. I watched them and come up on the edge of my chair, and we didn't have tanks like that when David and I were in the Marine Corps. They would jump a little ditch and break down. And they were not computerized, and they didn't go, and the helicopters went about 80 miles an hour and not 200 miles an hour. And so, then I say, wait a minute, what's going on here? What's missing, Where are the young men with their legs blown off at the knees, with their intestines wrapped around their necks? And the answer is that these things are not meant to educate. See, that's where they're reaching inside people's breasts and pressing buttons and manipulating people to join the army and be all that you can be and be available to be sent down to Central America to kill people and to die for your country.